So welcome everybody to a session where I'm in conversation with two very lovely friends. This is our second session at the Jaipur Festival where three of us have been together. And I was just thinking this morning, imagine if we weren't getting along. I mean, what a torture that would be. But if there were maybe a third or fourth, then that might happen, right? But while it's great, it's absolutely great. So I'm very, very happy to have with me Arunava Sinha and Vivek Shanbhag, two people that I work very closely with for very different set of reasons. Arunava and I co-run the Center for Translation. Apart from the fact that he has translated so extensively from Bangla and occasionally Hindi over the years, I also think that Arunava Sinha is responsible for setting very high sort of benchmarks of translation. So it is not simply the quantity of work, but it is also the fact that at a time when not too many people were translating with the kind of meticulous care, consistency, and sometimes even in the face of fairly mitigating circumstances. At a time when Arunava started translating, there weren't too many translators, publishers were not paying that much. And I remember, because our acquaintance goes back that long ago, there were times when he would say that, you know, even if the name didn't appear, one would want a reader to go to a bookshop and pick up a translated book like you pick up any other book. Since then, of course, translation itself, his own career, and the field has shifted, the terrain has become much more exciting, much more fertile. Vivek Shanbhag, the author of Ghachar Ghochar, Sakina's Kiss, among many other things, is not only an extremely reputed writer in Kannada, but he's also one of the most translated authors of India today. And everywhere that Ghachar Ghochar has gone, it has inserted that phrase into people's lives, Ghachar Ghochar. My students also know this. So when I finish the course and I tell them that how complicated it is to decide finally what might be dharma, what might be the right thing to do, what is what might be a peaceful family or reconciliation and peace, and how it can never be that distant from strife and struggle, sometimes students themselves say, yeah, professor, ultimately it's all Ghachar Ghochar. Because they have understood what the philosophical breadth of that question is, and they have also understand that the deeply philosophical concepts actually do not translate, that we must use them in languages they come with, and the fact that the words themselves are nonsense, but they are also philosophical, makes it even more interesting to understand that life eludes language and life eludes sense. But today I'm talking both to Arunava and Vivek in a very different capacity. In the sense, I'm asking them very different questions. And I want to first begin with you, Arunava. And I want to ask you that from the time that, let's just go to the backstory before we come to your recent endeavor of Chowringhee Press. I want to understand that there is a certain way by we as individuals, after certain years of experience, seniority, what have you, we build institutions, or we play new roles in institutions, or we think institutionally, and not only about what it means for you. I'm sure some of that has happened, but I'm also sure that some of the impulse comes from what you identified as a certain need gap in the market of translation and its diffusion and marketing and dissemination. I mean, if there is one person in this universe who understands what is the market of translation and what might be the hurdles of it, and who understands the game from the start to finish, it is probably you're one of them. So is it possible for you to kind of talk to us a little bit about where is that thinking coming from, the thinking that went behind the establishment of your recent endeavor?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you, Rita, for your kind words. The last 2 years, if we look at translations into English, In the last 2 years, we've had close to 150 books being published in translation in 25 and in 24 by mostly the large presses as well as some smaller presses. Now, if I were to ask you name 5 of these 125 translated books, you'll find it difficult, right? A great deal of effort goes in terms of by the translators and by the writers and the publishers of the original work to put them up for translation. The translator spends a fair amount of time doing it. Once it goes into the publisher, and if it's a big publisher, it falls into a gigantic, quite undifferentiated pool of books. And if today I ask you, what kind of books do you associate, I'm just using Penguin as an example, what kind of books do you associate Penguin books with? No one will be able to pinpoint, right? Because they publish everything. So the whole thing is that therefore translated books, which by their very nature are a subset of serious fiction, because mostly it's serious fiction and a little bit of non-fiction that gets translated from the non-English Indian languages into English, is itself a subset of an endangered commodity, I don't want to use the word commodity, an endangered area of entity of books, thank you, because quite frankly, in today's very instrumental age of reading, books are supposed to educate you and take you forward and further along your mission, and reading great fiction is not part of that instrumentality. So the books are prepared, beautifully designed, they're launched on social media, and then it's frankly up to the author. The publishers can do very little. Readers get confused. You know, one day a publisher is telling me about this book in translation. The next day they're telling me about a book by a spiritual leader. Not next day, 2 hours later. They're telling me a book about a spiritual leader, and in the evening it's something else altogether, a corporate biography. So readers have no idea whom to believe and what to believe. So it is now up to the individual author to really create their own space and markets and readers. By its very nature, a serious writer of fiction and a translator is not going to be able to do those things, right? That is not their forte. I mean, you're one or the other. Sometimes you are very, very big on social media and you have your fan following, you're a speaker and so on. And then a publisher tells you write a book because you have a bunch of people who will buy your book. But that's not how this thing works. So this was the situation where I realized that there were some really great books in translation that were simply falling into a bottomless well. Nobody knows anything about them. And very quickly at that, the book comes out, within a month it's forgotten. So that was one problem that needs to be solved. The second thing, and this I will not call a problem, it's an opportunity. It's the fact that, and this came directly out of what we teach at Ashoka University, but also exchanging notes with others around the country, is that young people are very, very keen on translating, which may seem a strange discovery, but it is the truth. Maybe these are young people who are already at a liberal arts university and therefore have already passed through a certain funnel, but they're very interested in reconnecting or continuing their connections with their own language. Their natural writing language is English, so they find this a wonderful way in which to meet both needs. So given these things, two things together, I thought, is there a way in which we can do something to start a new way of getting translated books out into the space where readers may be able to find them. So that was the idea behind Chowringhee Press. It was fortunate that a person I know, Samir, who some of you may have heard yesterday, Samir Patil, has set up this print-on-demand platform called Stck Books. The thing about it is that Stck Books operates by making printed-on-demand copies available closest to the reader. So whether you're ordering your book in Bangalore or in Burma or in, give me another country with B, Bahamas. Bangkok, yes. It will be supplied to you from the printer who's closest to you, right? Number one. The second thing about print on demand is that you don't actually have to invest in printing large numbers of copies and storing them and then convincing distributors to take them out to bookshops and so on. So it's a completely different mechanism, which is that you get the word out to potential readers and you say, here's this book. If you want to order it, just click on this link and that's it. Everything gets taken care of from that point. So that's a kind of a mechanism. And the third thing was that I wanted to look at writers who have fallen out of public memory for the most part, and yet whose works are tremendous in their own languages. And to see if young translators would consider translating them into English. The added advantage being that you don't get embroiled in things about copyright and so on. These are all writers whose works are now in the public domain. So we have 4 titles coming out over the next 2 months, all done by all translations by young people. And the writers in question are Rashid Jahan, the Urdu writer who was known as the bad girl of Urdu, Subhadra Kumari Chauhan, who was famous for that line, Khoob ladi thi Mardani. Haan. But she was a terrific short story writer. We have Raj Lakshmi from Malayalam, who tragically died at the age of 32, and in many senses her life was likened to Sylvia Plath's. They were almost contemporaries, and she died in the same manner. And we have one stalwart. We have one book of Premchand's stories, which are 3 stories which were turned into films, 2 by Satyajit Ray and 1 by Mrinal Sen. So Shatranj Ke Khiladi, Sadgati, and Kafan. What we're going to do is that these will be, then we have to get the word out to people. And say, here are these books, here are these writers, and maybe here's an imprint that will always bring you books of this kind. So basically, I'm trying to do 2 things. One, tell potential readers, trust the imprint, pick up anything we've got, try it out. And secondly, to build a collective of translators so that translators can come in on their own. There will be a quality check and some discussions. It's not self-publishing. But translators can come in on their own with works that would normally not even be full book length. So the mainstream publishers may not consider publishing them. In fact, most of our works are in the 10 to 12,000 word range. Today, you can have books of that size. So the idea is, again, that they go out there, they get read, others read them, and maybe, hopefully, some or all of them will grow into becoming full-fledged translators who will then be published by other big presses. So I see ourselves as a sort of, that field where the seeds are planted and then you transplant them onto the bigger field afterwards. So that's the thought as of now.
Interesting. I'll come back to you on why this is a transition and not like the destination. But Vivek, over to you. And I would love you to talk about Hyphen, right? Because I want to understand that how, as an author, whose work went out to 40, 50 languages and so on, whether there was something in your experience as an author that made you think that you need to establish an institution of this kind. So if you could sort of just go back also to that moment, not just the immediate establishment of Hyphen, but where is that thinking coming from?
Thank you, Rita. Hyphen is something, that idea was born 20 years ago. I was running a literary magazine called Deshakala, during which time I had a column in that quarterly magazine to bring out literature from other languages into Kannada. And I knew many writer friends, as I have today, and I mistook it for knowing the literature of that language. And when I started that column, I was very confident. I thought that I know so many people, I can bring this, this, that. And actually, when I started to work on it, to pick one story, and the criteria was to bring something into Kannada, which is not there in Kannada, which would inspire writers in Kannada, which will, the readers would find it absolutely fantastic. If I have to pick that one story, I realized that my network of friends was completely useless. Because I had no access. I didn't know. I just knew people. That is not what knowing literature is. So I had to set up, teams of people within these languages. Then they suggested. I got few things translated to understand what that writer is, and so on and so. So it took 80% of my time to bring out those 20 pages. And since then, in fact, I translated Jayamohan in those days, which you have read now after 20 years. And I had a long interview with him when I was editing a literary review for a popular journal, for a popular paper. So that's the time when I realized it is so important that we need to understand this, we need to bring this writer into other languages. Because the kind of gems that I found was, amazing, the writers that I brought into. Kannada. And during this period is when I realized there is so much that lies there. And we keep saying, Indian writing is like gold mine. And I keep saying this, in gold mine you only get ore. You don't get gold coins. So that for 1 ton of ore you get 1 gram of gold. So you need to do a lot of work to get that 1 gram of gold. And as a writer, my experience in bringing out these books, my books into English and which went beyond borders, is that the various stages in translation. One is, the first thing is engagement with the translator, and to find the right translator whose first language is English, who can understand the tone and who can understand the writer and the style and so on and so forth. The work of the translator, Arunava is here, who has recently completed and published 100 books in translation. It's outstanding achievement. Yeah. So he knows what it is. He knows the kind of engagement one needs to be done with the work and the writer and that overall cultural context. So that's the first thing. The second is, when I worked on my book, Gachar Gochar, which is considered a good translation, end to end it took us a year and a half. So the point I'm making is that the amount of effort required in bringing a book into another language is enormous. It is not that, you don't just translate a sentence. You have to really bring that unsaid in one language into the other, and which is the biggest challenge. So I feel that and the book was submitted and there was very little editing. And the point I want to make here is that when we took it to UK and when we took it to US, there is absolutely very little editing, only to the extent of, saying elevator, lift, ground floor, first floor, lorry, truck, only to that extent. So it means that actually the language has, the translation has been good enough for people to understand, read, and receive it well. So both my books went through a similar thing with the big publishers like Faber and Penguin and so on and so forth. So the lesson learned from this is the amount of effort that is required for editing. Yeah, and I feel that today, if we need to bring out good translation, editing is one area where we need to really put in that effort and time. And Hyphen started with this idea. Two things. One is to find out the right works in various languages. Yesterday in our conversation, Rita made a very good point. You read a book, and if you want to find something parallel in another language, that we have no access to it today. For example, The Old Man and the Sea, there is a writer in Tamil called Joe D. Cruz, who is from the fisherman community. His description of the sea is completely, you've never read anywhere. So we do not know what lies there in Indian language. There are fantastic stories there. But we only go by big names. And that's the second problem. Yeah? So first is to identify a writer, second is editing, and third is also what is happening is that because there is no money in this in translation, the choice of translation is entirely left to the translator. Like in the 100 books, I can say it is Arunava's choice. Largely, okay. At least 50 he has made the choice, because a translator translation then takes it to the publisher and so on and so forth. So as a result, there are many books. It's very much possible that they have fallen out of this purview of some translators. So there is the third aspect of the challenge. So these three we thought we will address in Hyphen in three different ways. So in one sentence, Hyphen is to bring Indian literature into English. So everything that Hyphen does is in English, and everything it does is from Indian language into English. The first part of that is a magazine, which is a literary magazine, something that size of Granta, maybe 250, 300 pages, and that will come out twice a year. So we set up an office last October in Bangalore, and the first issue is scheduled for July this year. So that's the first part of it, because magazine is something that can introduce variety of writers. Unlike a book will introduce one writer. A magazine can introduce 20 writers to the readers in English. The second part of it is a publishing house, which is, again, a very curated small publishing house, which we are going to start at the end of this year. And the third one is a digital arm, which will have a website to complement the magazine. It will have the content over and above that. It will have discussions and the kind of things that Arunava mentioned about, making writers visible, having conversations with them, podcast, variety of things. Because see, it is not enough just to present a work in any language. For example, my readers in Kannada read my work because there is a context. When we bring it out into another language, that context is lost. So we need to provide some scaffolding for a work and for a writer, so that we help readers to take that writer and accept that writer and read that writer. So that kind of work is something that will happen through the website. It's a website. It will have an online bookshop only for translated works, and it will have many other things like mentoring and fellowships and so on and so forth, events and readings and whatnot. So this is the idea. This is a very ambitious plan behind Hyphen, and we are targeting the market within India as well as US and UK, because we believe that there is a large market for writing, for Indian writing and translations into English. So that's briefly what Hyphen is. I can go on and on, but let me stop here.
I'll ask both of you questions that would be common to you both. And these are very brass tacks, because that is what we are dealing with today. One is payment. And how do you propose to pay the translators? What would be your parameters? I also want to ask you, when I go to Europe and so on, translation studies or translators in all these countries are trained people. They carry license, they go through courses of translation and interpretation. Each of these countries has a policy on translation. What is your take on the formal training of a translator? Like, what do you think if somebody who comes to you and says that I have taken a course with XYZ, makes you feel that there is more credential to this translator? And in that case, how would your approach be different from, let's say, a novice, so to speak? I'm guessing you will check both, but I just want to see what are your benchmarks looking like. Any response?
Yeah. Okay. So, do you want to know about both payments and? So, for Chowringhee Press, the idea is very simple. The way it works on the Stck Books platform is that you have a cover price. And right now the cover price will be in dollars because it's primarily meant for an overseas audience, but there's also an Indian cover price in rupees. The platform keeps 25% of the net, which is the cover price minus the printing cost. And the 75% of the net then comes to the publisher, which in this case will go entirely to the translator. And by my arithmetic, for every copy of translated books sold abroad, the translator will actually make between 400 and 500 rupees, which is some 10x the royalties or 20x the royalties they would get working with a big published normal royalty structure in India or anywhere else in the world for that matter. So that's as far as the payments are concerned. But I cannot afford to make advance payments. Obviously. So it is based on how many copies are sold. And to be honest, I also make it very clear that the quality of the book is not determined by how many copies are sold. So therefore, nor must you, unfortunately, judge the quality of your book by the amount of money you're making. It is not the ideal situation. And perhaps if this, I'm calling it an experiment now, takes off to a point where there may be some grants coming in where people who are interested in supporting a project that they think is worthwhile, then we will be able to pay translators more generously, like we do at the Ashoka Center for Translation, which is a different scheme. Your other question was about quality and whether... training. Yes. So certainly my ears perk up when I hear that someone has trained or has been mentored by people I respect or people who are well respected in the translation community. But it's the proof of the pudding is still in the work that comes out. But most certainly I can say this, that anyone who has gone through this training or mentorship is better equipped. They know what to watch out for. Now, whether they're good writers, as you must be in order to be a good translator, is much to do with themselves. I don't think you can learn to be a good writer in the sense of the inherent talent that is required, but you can certainly learn a lot of other things. And if you go through a training process, it helps. They rise to the surface. you know there are 5 or 10 things that you have to watch out for. So it certainly helps.
Yeah. And more about also just supply chain, how do you think it'll work out in your case?
Since you said supply chain, I think it is, let me use another word, working capital. For a magazine and for a publishing house, they work differently. Printing industry, publishing has not a very healthy working capital percentage to the overall turnover. But very little can be done unless you really attack that distribution, things like this. So new thoughts are being done. We are thinking about it in what other ways we can reach out to people. But that is an issue which I think one needs to address if one has to see it as a business model that can be made viable in time to come. So that's certainly an area which we would like to look at. And so that's one. And then magazine has a different reach. And magazine hopefully can make more inroads than a book can. Because when you pick up a book, you are stuck with a book. When you pick up a magazine, you have 25 choices. Yeah? You don't like a writer, there is one more. There is a poem, there is an essay, there is something else. There is something or the other to hook a reader into that space. And once it is done, we believe that it is possible to take it forward with little more effort from our end. So that's broadly what I can say at this point in time. But certainly we are making many other efforts to see the ways to reach the readers than the conventional channels. The second question on translation, on what kind of training and what kind of criteria that we would apply, it will be no different than what Arunava said. I really prefer a writer who is a creative writer. Because I believe that good translators are creative writers. They might not have published creative writing, they might not have written a story, but that imagination that is required to create something in another language is exactly same as the imagination required for a creative writer writing in that original language. And which is why I said it took so long for a work to be translated, because of that engagement with the language. It is not just the translation of one sentence into another language. That imagination is required. And we will look for those kinds of people. It is not easy to find. There are people, and there are some people whom we have found who are first-time translators but have shown, fantastic strength in these things. So we are very much open to that. And also, I think we also need a little bit of luck to find these people. Like Srinath, my translator, had never done a translation. And I had read his work, and he had sent some stories to me. He has not published any of his fiction, but I read his book, Travelogue, and I felt that there is something in him, and he can actually, his sensibility is very close to mine. And he had never done a translation, and I asked him, he said, I have not done a translation, this, that. But finally, it turned out to be such a fantastic work. So, some kind of, so. It's a continuous thing, Rita. There is no, this is something which we have to do every day to do this. I mean, you both know this better than me.
Yeah. Sorry, Rita, I just wanted to add that by now it will be obvious that both these efforts are trying to work outside the existing system.
Yeah.
So the idea is not to go in there and start competing for bookshelf space or convince distributors also take our books.
Yeah.
That's not the idea at all. We want to try something new, something different, and find an alternative route to readers and buyers.
Yeah.
And I feel that Hyphen is something that would like to join hands with everyone, which is why, Arunava is with me, everyone is with me, even the publishers, because for a publisher to have a literary magazine and support a literary magazine is absolutely critical, because your magazine is introducing new writers, and it is developing a readership. And it's good for them to join hands with.
And that's where the demand will originate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we now actually can build a situation with a magazine like Hyphens, where readers are saying, I want to read more of this writer, that's the ideal situation.
Yeah. Would you also be, how would you be looking at AI as you go further on this?
See, AI is something that has enormous possibilities. If you ask me today, not much is possible for translation. because see, there is something, as I just now I said, it is to bring unsaid from one book, one language into other. That is something where the AI has not yet reached the stage, because to see the unique tone, the choice of words of a writer, the choice of, those things are lost in this translation. And I don't think, I feel 90% of the books written today can be translated into another language using AI, but we are only focusing at that 10% which cannot be translated. The book with literary value, the literary books, it's very difficult to translate because of the element of surprise that it has, because of the, I keep saying that you say something, you mean something else in good literature. It is never what it means, what the sentence, so that is something that AI is yet to reach. It might reach. I also have some exposure to AI, and the technology is fantastic. We have not even understood what it can do, and we have only seen the tip of the iceberg. It is, and we have someone who will also advise us on AI, an expert on that. But right now, nothing.
But there's one great use of AI that I'm hoping we can bring into this, which is to take a look at people on social media and identify potential readers. Many people express their interests and their proclivities through their posts and so on. How do I identify all of them and reach out to them? AI can probably do a great job of processing this huge amount of information that's already in the public domain and try to pull out potential readers for this book or this language or that language.
My own experience is that if it's a very sort of flat prose, let's say somebody's address to a gathering, AI can do a great job of it. Yeah. Even actually a novel that has the unspoken, the AI will give you the simple sentences. The dramatic irony of it is actually generated by reading it holistically. But in as much as simple sentences are concerned, it can do it. What it cannot do is when something is shifting within that design. When from a character begins to get inconsistent. AI cannot handle that at the moment, right? But so in some sense, what you do today is extremely timely. But in some sense, what you're doing today is also coming at a time when the AI ambit has become sort of much bigger.
Yeah. So one of the things, I've experimented with AI in trying to translate trying to get it to translate entire novels or novellas, just to see what comes out.
Right.
The one thing that an AI program cannot do is remember what the novel is. So by the time it's doing chapter 5, it has no idea what chapter 1 was, because it's just reading it on its own, right? So because it doesn't get the arc, it cannot catch all that is going on. And the other interesting thing about AI is that if you give it the entire text at one go, by about after 3,000 or 4,000 words, it starts hallucinating. So you have to make it do it in installments, but without the memory, which means that it is not even aware that it is actually translating the same novel. It's a new piece of work every time. So.
But doesn't it ask, can I do this much or that much?
Yeah, but they're very generic questions. So
right. Okay,
you might be able to get AI to do it if you want to outsource the final bit of word building, but you provide continuous prompts where basically you're sharing your thinking, saying, this is what it says here, can you do it for me? My point is that actually is easier to do it and quicker to do it yourself. So it's not yet reached the point where you can, where it can intuit.
Clear.
Yeah. That whole intuiting bit is
that's
missing.
Really interesting.
But there is a seductive quality about AI work which makes you think that it's wonderful. And that is worrying, because then you say, oh wow, this looks great, it must be great right through.
See, the other thing is, through translation, you also add something to the language, to English, right? And that's something if you want to add, and that is what makes translation very sexy, very interesting. Because it's not something that you have read. It's not flat language, it's not flat English. There's something different about it. And that is difficult to achieve with AI today. Because AI has not yet translated that many Tamil works into English so far. Nobody has given that work to the source and the so-called good translation. No one has fed it to the AI and said that, look, this is a good translation, keep this as a model. So when you feed thousands of such works, then maybe some point in time it might be able to achieve. But today that is what is missing, to add something to the language. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I tried a little exercise with AI where death is a bush, like a shrub, in one instance, but death is a woman in another instance. And AI could not figure out when it had to use it and when it had to use she. And the story has both, because death, then, once you begin to talk to death, then death is like having a conversation with you, like like a woman who says, मैं तुम्हारी मृत्यु नहीं हूँ, मैं ऐसे नहीं आ जाती, बस कोई भी बुलाए और मैं आ जाऊँ, मुझे जहाँ जाना होता मैं वहाँ जाती हूँ. And then on other occasions, she sits like a bush, just sort of shaking her head. And AI simply couldn't figure out. So I think, yeah, part of it is memory, but part of it is also this, that there is an instability of meaning in a good literary text. And that it, you know. But anyway, what I'll do is right now I'll open the house for Q&A, and maybe once again go back to Vivek and Arunava. But at the moment, let me see from so much that has come up, whether you have any questions. You'll have to introduce yourself if you don't mind, and then ask your question. So let's begin with the second row, the gentleman there who was the first to raise. Yeah. And I'll come to you later. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mohan. Thank you so much for the discussion. I'd love to know more about translation from the English into Indian languages. What might be motivating people to do that? I assume it's not commercial incentives. Where is it happening in vibrant ways? And any perspectives that you might be able to offer on English to Indian language translations.
Right. Do you want to do that? Any
Yeah,
of
I can. Yeah, there is. I can give you an example from Kannada. There are many translations happening from English into Kannada, and mainly it is non-fiction. So there's a lot of demand for non-fiction books, because in Indian languages you will not find those equivalent books. The kind of research that is being done, especially for some recent in the last 10 years, the kind of books that are published in English, many of them have found their way into Kannada. Commercials, I think it's very difficult to say. It's not a huge market for non-fiction translated works. I would say it's the same thing in other Indian languages as well. So that's one part of it. For other things, it is. See, there was a time when there were direct translations from other Indian languages into between Indian languages. And one of the things that is happening today is that because that is dwindling, that space is occupied by English. Slowly, not occupied, it is English is occupying that space. And I see that that's one of the things that Hyphen will also be providing. Like, for example, there are no translators to bring works from Gujarati to Kannada directly, from Bangla to Kannada directly. There was a time when there were many translators to bring from Bangla to Kannada. But now with works available in English, it's possible that someone might be interested in reading these, and it's possible to. It's not the best way to do, but it is probably that is the best possible way to do today.
I'll just give you one example, and you can draw your own conclusions about the state of affairs. In Bangla, Jhumpa Lahiri, whom Bengalis are very proud of, Jhumpa Lahiri's last book, Roman Tales, was commissioned by the biggest Bengali publisher to a writer of romances, a very popular writer of romances in Bangla, who churns out the same story over and over again with different characters' names. And this person was asked to translate Jhumpa Lahiri. And I actually was very curious, and I asked the editor, why did you choose this writer? Because there are plenty of good translators into Bangla from English. And they said, because the book must sell. So it will sell on the translator's name, not on Jhumpa Lahiri's name. So please draw your own conclusions from this.
I'll add one more from Gujarat. Sudha Murthy sells a lot. Self-help books sell a lot. Recipe books, autobiographies of CEOs, those things sell a lot. So, in fact, I feel like translation into Gujarati is commercially not just viable but profitable. As long as these are commercial books, these are self-help books, not literary ones. All right, next question, please. First row, the one in red shawl. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this wonderful session. I'm Dr. Chavi Gandhi. So my question is that are we, with so much of English translations happening, not just from Indian languages, but from other countries as well, like Korean and Japanese, are we diluting the regional voices with this much of domination with English translations?
Diluting meaning, I didn't understand. What do you mean by diluting?
Diluting means, for example, okay, let's take your book, Ghajar Ghochar. Do you think if we, instead of English, if we just translate into, other Indian languages, for example, Gurumukhi, Punjabi, there will be cultural gaps, that's why they are not dominating? Or my main question is that why English translations are dominating so much?
Because there is, as I said, the translation between Indian languages has come down. We don't have new translators. What we have are, the ones who have been doing for the last 30, 40 years. There are many reasons. I don't want to go into that. And one of that is there were many in the border areas, there were many schools of other languages. For example, there were Kannada schools in Kerala and similarly Marathi schools in Karnataka. All that has become gone almost because of the political rhetoric and the thick borders and things like that. So all translators came from those areas. So that's one. Second is there was a lot of people, like there was a translator called Ahobala Shankara in Kannada, who translated, who went to Calcutta, learned Bangla and translated Rabindranath Tagore's all stories into Kannada, all volumes. It's such a thick and fantastic translation, high class. He was an an editor at Times of India, Bombay, and he dedicated many decades of his life for this. Such passionate people are no more there because there is no money. Not that he had money, but he had passion. So in the absence of that, there is no other way. So at least the English is something better than nothing. So and it's very difficult. Coming through English is not the best way for any Indian language translation because of the structure of the languages.
Did you mean to also include translations from global languages like Japanese and Korean into English?
Yes.
So the thing is that most readers who read in English allow the West to dictate what they will read. And right now, translations from Japanese and Korean are the hottest thing in the translation market in the West. So automatically we end up reading those. Walk into a bookshop and look at the English titles. You'll find very few from India, whether translations or original writing. So that's where tastes are being formed.
Okay, I'll take quick questions of people who already raised their hands. Yes, second row, please. You, and then gentleman over there. Your responses will have to be really short. We have barely 5 minutes. Yes, please, go ahead.
Hello,
quick.
my name is Garvita and my question is to Mr. Vivek Shanbhag. You wrote the book Ghajar Ghochar originally in Kannada, but do you often read your other translations? If yes, how do you perceive them? And how do you perceive authorship in such cases?
Sorry, I didn't. What is the question? How do you?
Okay, so you wrote the book Ghajar Ghochar originally in Kannada, but do you often read your work in other translations, like in English translation? Did you read your own English translation? So how did you perceive it?
Now see, the book is in many languages. In every language, it's a different book. Though every sentence is translated into these many languages. Because that's the challenge of translation, I said. Because the same sentence in another language may not evoke the same memories. So it's a different book. It's the same sentence, it's the same thing, it's a different book. That is where the challenge of translation is. That's what I meant by bringing unsaid from one book to the other. How do you keep that experience intact? That's a big challenge.
All right, one last question there, yeah.
Hello. You talked a little bit about training for translators. What are the kind of key skills that a translator should be learning through that training?
Well, first and foremost, you have to read. You have to, I'm just exaggerating, but you probably have to read 100 books to translate one. You have to read 100 books in the source language and in the target language. I don't like those phrases, but it's convenient. You have to have a tremendous ear. it's very important to listen and not just read with your eyes. You have to have, as Vivek said, wonderful imagination, because you have to imagine the world that is being created by the words, not explicitly but implicitly, and then you have to recreate that imagined world back into your new language with the same economy as the original text. You can't spell out everything just because you have seen it in your mind's eye, right? So these are skills perhaps which sometimes even surpass those of writers themselves. So it's a very specialized set of skills, and like everything, these muscles grow with practice. You have to do that riyaz all the time. So the other thing I would say is translators have to practice every single day if possible, most certainly. And it is not about finding word equivalents or so on, I mean, most questions get asked, how do you translate X into Y? And my answer always is you don't. You're not translating X into Y. You're translating something else that's behind the X. So, but training is about practicing really, and with maybe under someone's watchful eye.
Yeah, I mean, literary translation is very different from other kinds of translations. So I think that training is really about close reading, if anything. All right, I think I will wrap up this session here. Thank you all so much for being such an attentive audience. And thank you, Arunava. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, Rita.